Hi, William Arnold here. I'm here to talk to you about plant-based photographic developers, why you might want to use them, some ways that you can use them, and I'll be talking you through how you can make your own. So for me, the lockdown period really caused a renewed interest in DIY, kitchen sink, bathroom-based photography, and in that a greater impetus to think about the environmental impact of the chemistry outside of an official institutional setting where you kind of have protocols in place to deal with the normal chemicals. So I've got a day job as a teacher and technician for the photography department at a sixth form college. And kind of the principal perk of this is kind of all the after hours access to the facilities. So anyway, I've had a strong interest in potential ways to mitigate or at least draw attention to some of the environmental hazards of photochemistry and to encourage responsible use. So in short, there's an interest here in thinking about the potential hazards of photographic chemistry and to encourage responsible use. Now, a lot of these home-based processes, especially like plant-based developer, Caffeinol C that you might have heard of, I personally think they're best described as safer rather than necessarily safe or eco-friendly. I think we should be kind of aware and careful from the beginning not to think of these things as necessarily completely benign just because they're based on plants. That said, however, they should be enormously better due to not containing harmful things like hydroquinone, for instance, or metol that you would find in regular photographic developer, which isn't fantastic going down the drain and is certainly absolutely hideous if it escapes into the general environment. So how did I get into all of this? Well, several years ago I started making work on my lunch break walk at work, where I worked at the college, and what I did was I had a large format camera which I'd borrow from the cupboard there. I'd take it out on the walk and I would use the Harman direct positive paper, where if you don't know about that, it's a kind of photographic paper where it makes a positive print directly with conventional black and white photographic development as opposed to a negative. I had heard about this process using instant coffee, vitamin C and washing soda and for developing film, and was interested to see how it would react on this paper. So part of the reason for making these walks at lunchtime was to think about these kind of, it's become a bit of a cliche, but these edgeland areas, and thinking about contemporary wilderness and how that can benefit one's kind of physical and mental health. So kind of really referencing a lot of that kind of like Victorian era thought on the wilderness and making a sort of, a slightly ironic comment on that, doing it in this kind of scrubby edgeland place and doing it in an hour's lunch break. Anyway, long story short, these photographs that were made on the direct positive paper were developed using instant coffee from the staff room at the college. So really horrible, grotty stuff. Probably, again, another cliche of kind of like teachers and people who work in these institutions being kind of overpressed and hard worked, and this reliance on the kind of the horrible stimulant to develop these pictures that were from the wilderness place seemed to fit as a kind of conceptual thing. Anyway, what I found when developing these pictures is that the Caffeinol actually worked pretty well as a print-based developer. It was, slower than what you'd normally expect, which fits in with it being more of a film-based developer where the blacks build up slowly over time. But the other thing that was interesting about it is it made this kind of, very, very sepia stain because of the coffee, and the fibre-based paper took that on very clearly. So having this knowledge of how to make a DIY based developer led me at the start of the period of lockdown when we were stuck at home to think about revisiting this. If anyone knows anything about my practice, you'll know that I'm very interested in plants and in landscape histories, and also in kind of getting people to engage with plants and local flora. So I was making making pictures essentially just of the garden, something to do, something to kind of solve the boredom. And I was using the direct positive paper, and I was using the Caffenol developer to develop these, which was working pretty well, setting up a makeshift darkroom in the bathroom with a bicycle tail light. And then I started kind of just to collect these things. So this is the type of paper. Starting to collect these things, these Caffenol prints. Like so, we'll show some close-ups on the screen. But started to become a little bit frustrated, I think, maybe with the tone of them, and wondering if there was any way of getting a more kind of straightforwardly neutral toned print. This is in very good light. We'll show some close-ups. So at this time in lockdown, I was also taking part in what was supposed to be a physical residency in London, but ended up being an online thing with guest projects and the LAPC, looking into how we can make our darkroom practice more sustainable. So the Caffenol fitted in with that, and I was making these prints on the 5x4 inch Harman direct positive paper. They were working pretty well. Now, there were some other people in this group who were also interested in DIY, kind of more environmentally friendly developers, and they were working with plant-based materials. John Blythe and Crystal Benz, who were using like gorse teas and chard and many other different things to release the kind of phenolic compounds that, with the vitamin C and with the washing soda, enable a working developer. So one thing I was interested in, being sort of sometimes pleased with this kind of sepia stain, but sometimes a bit kind of, I don't know, maybe less so, maybe a bit fed up with this stain, wanting something more neutral. I was interested to try out some of the other plant-based developers that they were using to see if they'd work on this paper and what they would look like. And in the end I found that, to be honest, basically most any plant to some degree or another will, if you kind of make a tea out of it and mix it with washing soda and vitamin C, it will yield a working photographic developer. Some better than others, as we can discuss, but basically they all work. So I tried various different kinds. So there's a kind of tried ribwort plantain. Sometimes taking a photograph of the plant itself and then developing it with the developer. So ribwort plantain, I noticed this very kind of pronounced sort of yellow stain to it. There's another one there, such a picture of willow, but it's with the ribwort plantain. Then there's mint, had this very, very almost like kind of like sickly nicotine stained tone to it. It seemed to provide a kind of, it was a powerful developer. The blacks did turn black very quickly, but on full development we've ended up with this. Again, it's something that's subjective, I guess. It's you could have a series with this tone and it might be something that suits what you're doing, but that's a little bit on the strong side for me. I found what's this gorse. Gorse is actually very neutral, although seemed a little bit slower than some of the others from my experiments, so I haven't quite managed on. By the way, so keeping the times kind of pretty similar with these, so using a Patterson tank with one of the inserts to take 5:4 film, developing these in there and using 12 minutes at room temperature. Notice the gorse didn't quite generate the same black, but it has, yeah, it's made this kind of very kind of nicely neutral toned print. Then the one that I will show you today in the tutorial is the willow based developer, which for me was the most successful one that I tried. It's got a slight warm tone to it, but it's relatively neutral. It's got good blacks, just kind of good gradation throughout the whole thing. So I think as one to kind of work with that seems pretty reliable for the Harman Direct positive paper. It was a winner. Also trying this on film. Don't know why you can see that there. I mean, it worked admirably. They look like they're just developed in regular chemistry. There's little of huge interest to say about these other than the fact that it works very well. And these actually, they're images of, if you're wondering what they are, just a line across the page are actually images of kind of tree stems. So a different project I'm working on is to do with apples, and I've been collecting different apple species and grafting them, and these are photographs of those. But the Willow developer has worked really well for that. So I mean, it could be something that you would actually use for practical purposes rather than just to make a point of being more eco-friendly. With the paper developer, I think there's more of a sort of an aesthetic reason for doing it. It's producing this particular kind of material quality that you may or may not want, and you can experiment with lots of different plant-based compounds to get different tones in your paper. With the resin coated paper, you're going to get less tone because simply the resin coat prevents it from taking on the stain in quite the same way as fibre based. But we'll be using later in the tutorial, we'll be making some resin coated prints at night using a torch. We're showing you how to set up your own darkroom at night. So I think the thing to do now is to have a break for any questions, and then we'll move on to the first tutorial part where I'll show you in the kitchen how to put together the working developer. The part after that, we'll have another break for questions, then we'll look at making photograms at night, so just how to set up a really makeshift darkroom scenario under the blackness of the night sky, or if you live in a town then you're unlikely to be able to have a dark enough space, you might want to consider doing the same thing just inside a bathroom or any other area where you can kind of safely black it out. And the last thing we'll look at is just a little tutorial of how we might be able to clean up our used fix somewhat. So here we have everything we need to make a working film or indeed paper developer, which is what we'll use this for later in the photogram section of the workshop. These one-shot developers based on Caffenol, they do tend to work better as film developers, so if you wish to use it for film, I would recommend you have a look at the Caffenol recipes and timings, which you can find easily online if you just Google Caffenol C film developer. So there are three basic ingredients we're going to use. We've got our willow here, two varieties. We've got the wild grey willow and this planted white willow as well, which doesn't normally really grow in Cornwall, but it's used kind of a lot as a kind of a landscaping plant. We've got soda crystals, just readily available from kind of any supermarket, and we've got vitamin C powder. This is, I mean, you could get this from Holland and Barrett. I bought this one online during the sort of the lockdown period. Graduated cylinder, I mean, if you've any old kitchen jug would do, but these are particularly useful. I've got a dev tray here, it's just useful to keep everything in. Teaspoon measures. If you've got a scientific scale and you want to be super precise, fair enough, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm really quite fond of teaspoon measures now because they're just, they're just handy, very easy to use. You don't need a scientific scale. When we're talking about making a developer out of bits of plant like this, I think really if you're going to be ultra precise with this, then it's just not really quite possible. So be careful as you can with the measures. They do work, they're really useful. Well, the first thing we need to do is prepare the willow tea portion of this developer. We're just going to use the electric hob top, as tempting as it was to be the kind of great kind of outdoors person. It's frankly just easier to do it in here, but there's no reason you couldn't do this outdoors with a gas burner. We're interested, let's use the leaves and the bark, but I'm sort of interested to get the bark because that's where the salicylic acid lives, which is what makes aspirin, and is also where most of the phenolic compounds will be. So let's just strip that off. Again, I haven't, unlike with caffeinol, I haven't worked out a way of how to be precise making this. So I'm simply going to go with making it good and strong. So let's get all this bark off here. Of course, salicylic acid is where the original form of aspirin, and can also be used as a rooting hormone. The way that willow propagates, in fact, is that it, especially one particular species, crack willow, loses branches and then they float downstream and they very, very easily root. But more or less any willow, you can shove the branch in the ground, and as long as it doesn't dry out, it will root very, very easily. So it's an easy plant to propagate. So let's use these leaves. One reason I'm actually quite keen on willow as a paper developer, even though it does sort of exhaust quite quickly and this would be more suited to film development, is that it doesn't seem to leave as much stain as some of the others that I've tried and we looked at to start with. So let's just, I'm going to stop talking a moment because I don't want to cut my fingers off while I'm doing this, but let's just scrape all that bark. Leaves as well. Whether the leaves are truly necessary or not, I don't know, but let's use both bits. Ooh. And we're simply just going to put this in regular saucepan. Now, this is a saucepan I use just in the kitchen as normal. I would recommend, really, with doing this stuff, you probably want a pan that you only use for this sort of stuff, but with it actually just being a willow tea, I think if we wash this pan out afterwards it'll be fine. We're going to make up the tea now. Let's put all that in. Let's pop these bits in as well. So actually it's quite a lot of plant matter here. I think, like as I said, in the absence of being very precise, I think the best thing to do is just make it good and strong. Amount of solution we're going to make, I have here, we've got 36 fluid ounces, or about a litre. For the recipe that I've given you on the printout instructions, we're using fluid ounces to go with the teaspoons. It's easier, but whichever your scales have. So we want slightly more than we're actually going to use in the end recipe here. So I'm going to just pour in this whole litre into the saucepan. Let's pop the lid on and let's put that on full whack on 6, and we're not going to watch the pot boil. I'm going to turn this off and we're going to come back when we've boiled it. So we've just come to a rolling boil now. You can see bubbling away nicely. We don't want to completely nuke it, but we're going to let it bubble away for 5 minutes before switching off and then letting it steep and cool down naturally. While we wait for the willow tea to cool, we can start preparing the rest of the recipe. So we'll start with the soda crystals. Now the recipe I've given you asks for 7 teaspoons. It's actually a half teaspoon measure I have here, so we're going to put 14 of these half teaspoons. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. And you might have noticed some of those were slightly more heaped than some of the others, but hopefully they'll balance each other out. Again, it's not super precise, but it should work. Next we're going to go with the vitamin C. So 1.5 teaspoons of this for the 700 millilitres of 24 fluid ounce mix. It's important that with this having been used for the washing soda, sodium carbonate, you don't use this vitamin C for anything else other than your photo development. Just a little bit before we get this in the packet. There's the half. I think the vitamin C is better done slightly over than under, so I'm just going to give it just another, nearly at the end of the packet, just a little scrape for luck. So, hopefully this is now cooled down enough for us to think about actually mixing up the solution. So I've got the willow here, which you can see. We didn't boil it for too long, hopefully. It was only a rolling boil for a couple of minutes and then we let it sit and steep. Now, I think sometimes I've had slightly worse results with the blacks with this from over boiling it perhaps. I think actually it might break down the phenolic compounds too much. So I think a couple of minutes at a rolling boil and then leave it to steep and cool to room temperature is ideal. This is maybe a little warmer than room temperature, but we want to this is just for an example. So we want to make up, I'm going to make up 700 millilitres or 24 fluid ounces. I'm just going to pour that directly in there onto the washing soda, the vitamin C powder. And make that up to 700. And you see actually this is a very yellow colour. When I've had slightly disappointing results, it's been quite a green colour, which leads me to believe that is from over boiling. So I think this is going to work quite well. Fingers crossed. Let's give it a stir. Let's use the willow stick for that. And let's make sure everything's just nicely dissolved. And there we have it. Okay, so we want to see if this functions, don't we? So this is a piece of photographic paper, obviously completely exposed now in the daylight. I'm going to pop it in this tray, and if it works, we ought to see a pretty immediate reaction when we pour the developer onto it. That'll do. And actually you can see very quickly that's changed colour. And we'll just agitate that a little. Now we're hoping this turns a nice deep shade of black. So this is actually after about 5 minutes, and you can see it's almost completely black. Now, I actually shot this bit preparing the developer after the section where I show you making the photograms at night. Now in the section making the photograms at night, you'll notice that the prints didn't go a lovely deep black, and I was a little bit confused as to why that was, and it's actually simply, I think, because I didn't give it enough time. Despite that initial reaction, it's actually taken, as I say, just 5 minutes to go this black, and I've had very good results using it with long development times, like 12 minutes with both film and with direct positive paper. So this does really show that actually it works. It's a film developer. It works better for making film. However, it can be used as a paper developer. You've just got to expect something slightly different than the conventional very, very quick reaction and very, very quick build-up of blacks that you get with a paper dev. But as you can see, it certainly works. You've just got to be a little patient. Another creative possibility, of course, with the developers, you can use it for chemograms on your exposed photographic paper. So just a very, very quick and random abstract doodling there, but as you can see, that will slowly start to develop on the paper. So I think that's sort of as much of interest that we have here. Of course, to use this as a film developer, just simply develop your film as normal and put it in a film developing tank, obviously under pitch darkness. What I would suggest is you follow, as I do, I follow the Caffeinol C developing time, so whatever film I'm using. With direct positive paper, I've just used 12 minutes as standard, and that seems to yield a very, very good black. Actually, oddly, that seems to have reacted somewhat faster than that one did in the solution. So that's it. I'm going to wrap up here, and then we'll have a period of time where you can ask any questions about that process if it wasn't clear. Thank you. So, with our willow developer that we've made earlier, we're now going to set up the darkroom. Now, it makes sense to do this a little before it gets dark outside, so it's just pretty dusk. It's being Cornwall, it may well be July, but it's drizzling as usual. We've got two trays. They're set up pretty much on a level that's necessary. If I just turn this torch off a moment, you might see there's a red safe light. Now that's actually a bicycle tail light, and in a moment what I'll do is take the developer and the fix that we made earlier, and I'll pour that into the trays. Let's pop that back on so we can see. Okay, so we have our two sets of trays here more or less on the level, and I'm just going to take this willow developer we made earlier, and it's still slightly warm actually, but if we pour it in the tray now it should cool down enough before we want to use it. I'm using these small trays inside the larger trays, so any runoff isn't just going to go immediately into the environment. I mean, this should be relatively safe, being made out of willow, washing soda and vitamin C, but still we don't want to dispose of these things willy-nilly in the environment. More so the fix, which is just regular photo fix, we're going to be extra careful with that and make sure we're not just spilling that here into the field. So I'll put this in the tray. It's ready dilute. I've mixed this earlier, 1 part plus 4 parts as per the instructions on the bottle. So that's completely conventional. Now we'll just put that to one side. I'm just going to make sure these are completely on the level so we can develop evenly. Okay, that looks good. Only other thing we've got here are just some sets of tongs, so we're not actually putting our fingers directly in the chemistry. So now we're all good to go with the darkroom setup. Okay, so why exactly are we out here in the middle of the night in a drizzly field? Well, the reason is, I think it gives you, well, apart from the LAPC asked me to do this presentation, is it gives you kind of a different kind of creative scope. Like if you can go out with your car and you can carry a couple of kilos of kit, you can take your darkroom anywhere under the night sky. It's kind of an idea I got from an artist called Robert Schaller, who's famous for what he calls wilderness film processing, works a lot with hand processed 16mm film. But other artists such as Susan Durgis, who's very famous for working at night with the photogram process. Another artist who you might be interested to look at, someone called Jonathan Michael Ray, who's produced some work in Epping Forest with photograms of the landscape at night. So I'm just going to, I think it's dark enough now, I'm going to turn the safe light back on and then I'll actually just show you photogram process and we'll hope this developer works. Okay, so this is quite something. I was just about to show you how to make these photograms, and I was going to show you this contact frame, and right by this contact frame we now have a small spiny friend. A hedgehog has joined us, so I'm a little bit worried about him and I don't want to step on him, so what I'm going to try and do is just gently pick him up and put him out of the way because he's formed a ball. Actually, it's not going to happen, so we're going to have to share the space with the hedgehog. So what I'm going to do, so we don't knock the hedgehog over or step on it, which would be tragic, is I don't know what I'm going to do. I've never had this problem before. Let's just see. Oh, food. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. Oh man, are you okay? Let's put you back here because you can't stay there. Oh, come on, go in the hedge. Okay, so I'm going to be really careful not to step on any hedgehogs while we continue with this presentation. Okay, so we're going to use just regular Kentmere resin coated paper. I think that will work fine for our purposes. The hedgehog's gone, so it's good. So yeah, Kentmere regular resin coated paper. It's not very windy, so we could make photographs just without the glass, but for convenience and to get sharper photographs we have a Patterson contact printing frame. So the next thing really is for me to turn this off, and we'll make sure the safe light is indeed safe, and then we'll move on to making the exposures. Using this Kentmere resin coated paper, we've got two options for exposure. Tonight I'm actually just going to use this torch. I'm just going to turn it on and then I'm going to quickly turn it off again. Your other option is to use just a big pop from a flash gun. So first things first, I think we should probably check that the safe light is indeed safe and it's dark enough. So I'm going to take a sheet of paper out of the bag. Actually, I don't really want to waste a whole sheet, so I'm just going to tear off a piece and let's pop the rest out of the way. I'm going to put that in the developer and just going to give it a shake, and hopefully, all being well, it should just stay white. And if it does, then we know our safe light's safe. And so things seem okay here in Safe Light Town. It's the paper's just remaining white. So we know that our Safe Light's okay and we can work with that. So I'm just going to move that over into the fix now. So I'm just going to pop my light back on a moment. That won't be quite fixed, but I'm more worried about the hedgehog. So I've collected a few bits and pieces and we're going to try an exposure now using the contact frame. So I'm going to take a piece of paper from the bag and I'm going to try and keep it out of the direct safe light as much as possible, but obviously I also need you to see. Let's make sure it goes away carefully. Now making sure that we're just under the red light now, I'm going to place the piece of paper in here. I'm just going to take this sycamore leaf, it's going to be a very simple one. I'm going to pop that on there, I'm going to hold it tight and in register like so, and then I'm going to use this head torch to make the exposure. Okay. Okay, so let's see if that's worked. I'll remove from the contact frame, let's get rid of that leaf and pop it in the developer. So it's looking promising. A moped going by, we're not actually far from the road. And I don't know if I'm hoping you can see that on camera. We have appearing quite a nicely detailed image of the leaf, and the willow developer seems to be working admirably. Although you would expect probably with a regular developer, I think by now, regular hydroquinone like Ilford multigrade, that black would have gone very, very black. But it does seem that we've got some nice detail, so that's good. So I'm just going to keep rocking that tray, keep agitating it. And we'll see what we've got after a minute or so. Well, this has had about 2 minutes now, and still not a black, which maybe leads me to think that this is just more suited towards film development rather than paper development, but bear with it. We'll give it a little bit longer. I want to move on to show you a different print, so let's take this out and transfer it to the fix for now. So let's try a slightly different bit of subject matter. I think this bit of hedge bindweed will make for a nice print. Let's get rid of the slug that's on it. We don't want that particularly. Actually, let's leave this bit of grass so that it's climbing up. As you can see, the convolvulus family, it's kind of wrapped its way around this piece of grass. So must remember, let's turn this off. Let's take a piece of paper again. This time I'm just going to put it on top and cast a shadow as opposed to using the flattening device, the contact frame. Let's pop that on there. Let's lay it down like so. Should get an altogether different effect here. And I'm just going to quickly pop the torch onto it as before. 1, 2, 3. And let's pop that in the developer. So let's see how that is. Okay, so we've got a little way to go with the development. Well, I think we see there they're quite distinct images. They're not as black as many that I've tried before, so obviously maybe I need to tweak the recipe, or maybe I didn't boil the willow for as long this time, or maybe it's the type of willow. I have to say I'm a little disappointed they're not as black as all that, but nevertheless I think they're interesting photographs and they're actually very detailed. So I'm going to very carefully pack up now and take these things inside. I think what we can do is we'll look at what I've made indoors, and then we can have any questions. So we mentioned earlier, and in the health and safety with the instructions, that the used fix should never go down the drain. The reasons are that it actually contains a lot of silver from the process. It binds the silver atoms when you place the photographic materials in the fix, and it clears out the rest of the solution, and you're left with basically a solution of silver. Which, if it ends up at the sewage works in enough quantity, it will inhibit the bacteria that help to treat the water and to break down sewage. Also, the actual stuff itself, ammonium thiosulfate, oddly I discovered making this, it's actually a kind of fertiliser, which is a bit disturbing. So when you hear about how watercourses have been trashed by kind of industrial farming and spraying things like ammonium thiosulfate on crops, that's another good reason why we don't really want this stuff kind of going into the drain. So kind of any little bits we can do to avoid that, we should. So I mentioned there are ways you can mitigate it. One thing you can do is you can actually put steel wool in with your fix, and the silver, through a simple single displacement reaction, will bind itself to the wire wool, and then the steel wool rather, and then you can more safely dispose of it. The best thing to do would still be to try and take it to a local recycling centre. I've done this, you can hand it to them and they'll take it away from you. But if you're really stuck and there is nothing else you can do with it, the steel wool is a good way. A fun way of reclaiming the silver that I discovered is using old pennies. Before, I think up to 1992, these are very old pennies, pre-decimal. They were made out of primarily copper. They're made out of bronze, but it's like 90-something% copper. Copper sits below silver in the periodic table, and so through a single displacement reaction, any silver in contact with the copper in solution will bind itself, and you can actually make a very, very simple form of silver plating. So these have been previously silver plated in fix, and here you can see are some old pennies that haven't. So in this tray here, I'm going to put this old halfpenny and these pennies. It was a similar thing in the US. I can't remember when it was. This may or may not work. This is a cent from 1969. I've got a feeling this might be bronze, but we shall soon find out when we pour the fix into this tray. So what we should see happen, hopefully with a bit of luck, if this works, is that these pennies, made primarily out of copper, will react with the silver will plate them, and we'll end up with shiny silver pennies like this, and we'll get rich quick. So I'm going to pour on this used fix. You can tell that I use Foamer films with for any of the geeks out there, with that green anti-halation layer that washes off into everything. I'm not going to use all of this because I think this fix is actually still good for use. I just want to demonstrate this for the video, so we're just going to pour out that small amount. And I'll put that down there. And actually, you can see, I'm going to move this closer to the camera carefully. You can see already that actually the silver is binding itself to those pennies. So embarrassingly, I should have been wearing gloves from the start, but I actually want to pick these things up to show you, so I've got the rubber gloves on. You don't want to put your fingers in this. So watch pot never boils. Now you can see after 10 minutes or so there's a pronounced colour change in the penny, and you can see that it's, oh, actually you can see better there, you can see that it's very much plated in the silver from the fix. Now this is actually without any electrical current whatever. This is just a very, very simple reaction because copper is below silver on the table of reactivity. And also the American penny from 1969, I can't quite remember when the cut-off date is beyond which this won't work, is also very much plated. This modern penny, what year is it from? 94, so that wouldn't work. This is actually made out of a completely different substance altogether. So I'm not going to pour this away, I'm going to pour it very carefully back into the fixer bottle. I think in fact this fix is still good to use for a bit, so either way, even regardless of thinking of disposing of it, I'm going to continue reusing it. My childhood coin collecting obsession has come in useful there. I think that's kind of pretty cool, and I like it. I think it's a nice little comment on obsolescence, perhaps, thinking of these photo processes and these old coins. Actually, that's really worked remarkably well. So you should be able to see there they've actually buffed up incredibly well. I think you'll be fooling the numismatic collectors.